Have you ever had the feeling that something is changing in the world, but you can't quite explain what it is? Maybe it's the way people talk about faith today. Maybe it's the fact that there has never been so much diversity of beliefs being promoted at the same time. Or maybe it's because now more than ever, we are seeing a new narrative emerge. The idea that all religions are equal and that in order to have peace, we need to unify our spirituality. But what if I told you that this idea might not be as innocent as it seems? What if, under the pretense of peace, a new belief system was created, one that little by little would replace traditional faith with something completely new? If that seems exaggerated, look around you. Global organizations are increasingly promoting interfaith dialogue, political leaders are increasingly involved in spiritual matters, and new initiatives are emerging to consolidate this idea of a universal faith. And one of the greatest examples of this is the Abrahamic family house in the United Arab Emirates. This gigantic project was built with a very clear purpose: to unite Christians, Jews, and Muslims in the same worship space. At first glance, this may seem like a noble gesture. After all, who doesn't want to promote peace between different religions? But here's the question: does this union really respect the differences between these faiths, or is it actually diluting their doctrines to create something new? The fact is that globalization and technology are transforming the way religion is practiced. Today, we see more and more people abandoning traditional faith to adopt a modern spiritualism with no fixed rules, no dogmas, no commitment. The idea of a world where all religions coexist peacefully may seem like a dream, but in practice, it means giving up what makes each belief unique. It means that, little by little, the fundamental principles of age-old faiths may be exchanged for a new form of globalized spirituality shaped by interests that may go beyond religion. Now think with me, who benefits from this? Religion has always been one of the most powerful forces in society. It influences morality, politics, economics. If a new global faith were established, who would control it? Who would determine what is acceptable and what is not? And this is where things start to get even more intriguing, because while many believe that this religious unification will be something spontaneous, the truth is that there are groups that have been working for years to make it a reality. International organizations, political entities, and even large corporations have already expressed interest in supporting this idea. But what is really behind this? The concept of universal religion has always existed. Ancient empires tried to unify cults to consolidate power. Kings used faith as a tool of control, and in modern times we see attempts to create a new type of spirituality that is more aligned with contemporary ideologies. But here's the danger. When faith becomes a political tool, it loses its essence. Spirituality has never been about conformity. It has always been about truth, and truth by nature cannot be shaped to please everyone. Now I ask you, have you ever noticed how this idea of a world without religious differences is being promoted in movies, music, speeches by great leaders? Have you ever noticed how traditional religion has been portrayed as something outdated, while new forms of spirituality are presented as the only modern and acceptable way to connect with the divine? This is not a coincidence. This is part of a major cultural shift that is happening right before our eyes. And if this has already made you think, then you need to stay with me, because in the next segment, we will explore to what extent faith can be modernized without losing its essence. The world is changing rapidly, and the way we deal with spirituality may be one of the most profound transformations we will see in this generation. So tell me, if a new global belief system were established, would you know how to recognize whether it is legitimate or just another form of control? If this question makes you uncomfortable, then you already understand what is at stake here. In the next few minutes, we will analyze the impact of this new globalized religion on faith, on society, and on the way we understand the truth. Stay with me, because what comes next could completely change your view of the future of faith. Don't forget to like the video, leave your opinion in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever noticed how religion has changed in recent years? If we compare the way our grandparents practiced faith with what we see today, the difference is gigantic. Digital churches, services broadcast by artificial intelligence, spiritual leaders with millions of followers on social media. The modernization of faith is happening before our eyes. But the big question is, to what extent can we update religion without compromising its essence? Because, you see, adapting to modern times is not something new. Since the beginning of humanity, the way people connect with the divine has always evolved. But there is a difference between evolution and replacement. Imagine the following. You enter a futuristic church. There is no pulpit, no traditional benches. Instead, holograms project automated sermons, adjusted to please each follower's profile. An artificial intelligence system analyzes your feelings and suggests personalized messages to motivate you. Does it seem like innovation, or does it seem like something that replaces true faith with a digital spectacle? The problem is not the technology itself. On the contrary, modern tools can help spread the message to more people. But the danger arises when faith becomes more a product to be consumed than a real commitment to the truth. And what we are seeing today is a dangerous trend. Religious leaders are adopting increasingly generic speeches, avoiding difficult topics so as not to lose followers. Preachings focused only on self-help replace the teaching about repentance and transformation. Sermons that were once about faith are now about how to achieve personal success. And this raises an essential question. Are we shaping faith to fit into modern culture, or are we distorting the truth to make it more comfortable? This is the real dilemma of religion in the 21st century. Many churches and faith communities find themselves divided between preserving their traditions or becoming more accessible to the modern world. Some adapt and thrive. Others, in trying to please everyone, lose their identity in the process. And here is the point. Faith has never been about popularity. It has always been about truth. If we look at history, we will see that all major religious changes have been accompanied by challenges, reforms, persecutions, debates about what should or should not be accepted. But today, the question is not just a theological dispute. Today, we are dealing with a global transformation where spirituality can be redefined to fit into a universal narrative. And this leads us to an even deeper question. If religion is being adapted to meet the desires of society, who is really in control of it? If this has already made you reflect, just wait until we see how some global initiatives may be accelerating this change. Because in the next minute, we will talk about one of the most ambitious projects of our time, the Abrahamic family house, and how it fits into this transition to a new model of global faith. If you want to understand what is behind all this, stay with me. What comes now could completely change your view of the future of spirituality. Have you ever heard of the Abrahamic family house? Maybe this name doesn't sound familiar to you, but what is happening there could be one of the greatest symbols of the spiritual transformation that the world is experiencing at this very moment. Now, imagine a monumental space where Christians, Muslims and Jews share the same complex to practice their faith. 3 temples, a church, a mosque and a synagogue, side by side in one of the most influential countries in the Arab world. At first, this may seem like a great advance for world peace. After all, these religions have been in conflict for centuries. And now, there is a place where everyone can come together and practice their faith in harmony. But here's the question. Does this union really respect the differences between these beliefs, or is it creating something completely new? Because one thing is to encourage respect between different religions. Another thing entirely is to seek a unification that can, little by little, dilute the essence of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism to create a new form of global spirituality. And if you think this is just theory, look around you. We are seeing an increase in the idea that all religions must adapt to a new global standard, where it doesn't matter what you believe in as long as your faith is aligned with universally accepted values. But who decides what those values are? Who determines what can or cannot be taught within these religions? This is the question that few are asking themselves. The Abrahamic family house was inaugurated with great celebration, receiving religious and political leaders from all over the world. But one detail catches the eye: Jesus Christ is not mentioned in any of the project's core texts. And this is a problem, because Christianity is not just another religion. It is based on the faith that Jesus Christ is the only way to God. But in this new global spiritual environment, saying that there is only one way to God is considered too exclusivist. And here is the great risk. If the Christian faith needs to be modified to fit into this new global spirituality, will it still be true Christianity? History has already shown us what happens when governments and institutions try to control faith. The Roman Empire tried to shape Christianity to fit into pagan traditions. Political movements throughout the centuries have tried to use religion to maintain social order. Now we are seeing something similar, but in a much more subtle way. The idea is not to prohibit religion. It is to reformulate faith so that it fits better in a world where everything must be tolerated except absolute truth. And this is the real danger. Because if we accept this new idea of faith, where all religions must adapt to a neutral standard, we are giving up what really differentiates us. After all, think about it. What would happen if an entire generation grew up without knowing the difference between what is Christianity, Islam, and Judaism? If all beliefs were diluted to a point where no one knew what they really believed in anymore? And here is the final question. If the Abrahamic family house is just the beginning, what comes next? There are already proposals to extend this idea to other religions and other countries. Some suggest that in the future, the world will have a single global spiritual structure where all beliefs will be part of a larger system. But the question remains, will this be an advance or a disguised control? If this conversation has already made you reflect, then you need to stay with me, because in the next segment we will talk about something even more serious: the connection between this new global spirituality and world politics. Because in the end, whenever something this big is happening, there is a much greater interest behind it. Stay with me, because what comes now could completely change the way you see the world around you. If there is one thing that history teaches us, it is that faith and power have always walked together. From ancient empires to modern governments, religion has always been a powerful tool of influence and control. But what is happening now is different. This time, we are not seeing an empire imposing its faith on another. We are seeing something much more sophisticated: the construction of a global spirituality shaped to fit into a new world. And the big question is, who is behind this? Because nothing this big happens without planning. No cultural change happens by chance. There is always a greater interest behind the movements that seem spontaneous, and when we observe the current scenario, we see a pattern emerging. International organizations promoting interfaith dialogue, gigantic corporations funding modern spiritual initiatives, governments supporting ideas that, on paper, seem to bring union, but in practice may be paving the way for something much bigger. And here is the question: why are so many political and economic entities interested in shaping the way we practice our faith? The answer lies in the power that religion has always had over people. Throughout history, whoever controlled, the faith controlled society. The pharaohs were gods to the Egyptians. The Roman emperors demanded worship. Kings and popes ruled together in medieval Europe. And today, the world may be moving towards a new model, where spirituality will no longer be a personal choice, but rather a carefully managed system. But managed by whom? This is the question that few are willing to ask. Because you see, all this talk about religious unification comes with an important detail: the need for regulation. There are already discussions about creating international codes for religious speech to ensure that no faith is considered exclusivist or offensive. But think about what that really means. If religions need to adapt to be accepted globally, then little by little, the truths that make them unique will be softened or even eliminated. And if you believe that this is something distant, just look at what is already happening. Media platforms removing religious content deemed inconvenient. Laws are being discussed to restrict what can or cannot be taught in religious spaces. Spiritual leaders are being pressured to modify their messages so that they are more inclusive. But here is the most critical point. If faith needs to be diluted to be accepted, can we still call it faith? This is the real spiritual battle we are facing, because, in the end, when religion becomes a tool of social control, it ceases to be a path to the truth and becomes just another mechanism of power. And the big question now is not only what is happening, but what comes next. If the world is being prepared to accept a new model of spirituality, what will be the next step? Are we heading towards a moment when it will be impossible to follow the true faith without facing resistance? And more importantly, are we prepared for that? In the next segment, we will explore the future of faith and what we can do to remain firm in a transforming world. If you haven't realized what is happening yet, now is the time to open your eyes. Stay with me, because what comes next could be even more revealing. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, this is the right time to subscribe. Like the video and leave a comment. We have come this far. We have taken a journey to understand how faith is being transformed, shaped, and perhaps controlled. Now, one essential question remains. What can we do? Because it's not just about theory. We are not just talking about abstract ideas about global spirituality or cultural changes. We are talking about something that directly affects you, the way you live your faith, and the choices you will need to make in the future. And this is the truth. The world is changing, and so is faith. But you don't have to go with the flow. History shows us that whenever there were moments of transformation, those who were attentive managed to prepare. And that is exactly what we need to do now. So how do we stand firm when everything around us seems to be changing? The first thing is to recognize what is happening. The greatest strategy for weakening true faith is not to destroy it all at once, but to dilute it little by little until it is no longer recognizable. And we are seeing this happen, religion becoming a generic concept, values being adjusted to fit into social narratives, and absolute truth being replaced by a personalized spirituality, which does not require real commitment. The second thing we need to do is go back to the basics. If there is one thing that does not change, it is the truth. And in times of uncertainty, the only way to stay firm is to root yourself in what is solid. This means deepening your faith, knowing the scriptures, understanding the difference between true transformation and subtle manipulation. And the third thing, do not remain silent. There is a reason why certain voices are being silenced, why certain messages are being censored. But if you recognize the truth, then your responsibility is not only to keep it to yourself, but to share it, because, in the end, this is not just a matter of spirituality, it is a matter of freedom. the freedom to believe without having to adapt your faith to fit into a globalized system, the freedom to speak, to live your conviction without fear of being classified as someone who needs to be re-educated spiritually. And here is the decision that each of us needs to make. Are you going to follow the narrative that is being imposed, or are you going to question it? Are you going to adapt to this new model of faith, or are you going to stand firm in what has always been true? Because the choice is still yours. But perhaps, in the not-so-distant future, this choice will no longer be so simple. So, before the world defines what you should believe in, make sure that your faith is grounded in what does not change. Now, I want to hear from you. What impacted you the most in this video? Have you already noticed these changes happening around you? Leave your comment below. Let's continue this conversation. And if this video made sense to you, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message, because this conversation does not end here. It continues with you. Thank you very much for being with me until the end. See you in the next video. Until then.